Hello, I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. This is the fourth episode in the series of videos that will go over a lot of my blueprints. I'm using a separate save file that I call my Blueprint Playground. This has every advanced game setting turned on, making this effectively creative mode. I want to show off how these are made in case you want to make your own or edit these ones to fit your needs. In the last episode, I covered the blueprints for refineries. Today, I'm going to go over the 4 input machines, blenders, and manufacturers. These blueprints are free to use, and the link to the Google Drive is in the description. Alright, let's get to these blueprints. So let's start with the manufacturers because you use these quite a bit before you get to the blenders. Both the manufacturers and blenders are just a little too wide that they don't fit easily side by side inside the blueprint designer. So each one is going to get their own. So keeping up with the load balance theme, these fit together really well, and let me show you how I did it. So I wanted to be able to do something that would work for both a 2 or a 3 or any other version of a split I'm going to use. And so I start with placing the manufacturer right here, which gives me a full foundation in the front to work with. And I'm leaving the back open, mainly because out of all the things to leave out, I feel like the mergers to gather up the end resource is probably the easiest one, and it's usually the one that I'm going to want to be the most flexible because I don't know if it's going to the left or to the right, or if we're sending it straight out, if it's going to another machine. So for me, if I know I'm going to place a whole bunch of these and I know exactly how I want to place them, I'll load them up ahead of time, save the recipe, save the merger in the orientation that I want, and then just save a separate one. But as far as a template goes, I like leaving the output open just to give me that flexibility. If you want to just load these up and save a merger with it, I certainly don't blame you. As far as the inputs go, this is where it's a little bit trickier. So I could have obviously made 2 different versions of this for the splitters so that I could kind of match the patterns, but it felt like a little bit more work than I wanted to do. But let me show you how to do this in case you do want to do that. So to find where to place the splitter, I like to just grab a lift, place it, have it facing out right here. And then from here, if I grab a belt and I pull it sideways, I can figure out where that right angle is going to be. So if this was the manufacturer that's going to be on the right of where all the splitters are, I want this belt to be able to make a nice right angle straight into the splitter that's going to be over here, right? So that's pretty much where I need to place the splitters, is on this line. So if I wanted to make an opposite version of this one, I would take a splitter, and this side would be the one that gets 4, and then 3, 2, and 1. And then we can just go ahead and delete all of these bottom ones. And now we can grab our lift and connect it from the splitter to the machine. And you'll notice you get the nice blue line and you'll get that snapping sound. So that is as far as you can go, and then still be able to connect. Moving on to the blenders. It's a real similar setup, but because we have 2 fluid inputs and 2 solid inputs, this sort of a thing doesn't quite work where I can do it sloping up on one side and sloping down on the other, because I need the same fluids and inputs to be all on the same level. So I just decided to go from right to left, mainly because I want to keep the fluids as low to the ground as possible to avoid needing extra pumps. And it's just easier to use the lifts for the belts. So like with all of the blueprints, everything is Mark 1, even the pipes. I generally try to keep things as small as possible and not try to max out Mark 2 pipes wherever I can. So a lot of the time I am using the Mark 1 pipes. So with these I did the exact same thing. I went and placed the blender right in the middle, giving myself 1 foundation here in the front. If I place a lift, I can see that the middle of the splitter needs to line up with this line right here. So this one is going to be the 3rd one up, and then this one is going to be the 4th one. And then from here, I can just grab my lift, connect it to the splitter and into the machine. So as far as the fluids go, there's quite a few different ways you can do it. I am going to keep things all lined up together, mainly because you can stack both the pipeline and belt stackables together, if you didn't know. So if I switch over to the pipe, now I can do this, and as you can see right there, that's basically how this works. We've got the two pipelines and then two belts. So I can really easily carry every input all on one bus if I wanted to. So I'm going to keep these lined up with the splitters. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're belting this sort of a thing up with splitters and mergers, it's basically every 4 meters is how you're going to get a right angle. Right, like this is all right angles. So with pipelines, it's a little bit different. So if I were to duplicate this and put it in this same square where it is in that foundation, and then I put another one here and another one here, these aren't going to be right angles, unfortunately. They're close, but it's not quite. And the reason for it is instead of every 4 meters, pipelines are every 3. So if I wanted to keep it in this same column, I guess you could say, I'm going to move this back 1, 2, 3. And then same with this one. If I line it up here and I move it back 1, 2, 3, now I'm going to have right angles. So pipelines can actually be a little bit more compact with the junctions versus a splitter. However, for the blueprint, I like the look of keeping everything lined up, and so for something like this, I am just going to manually place and make it a right angle. So using the same example, I'm just going to have to use for something like this, it would be just ever so slightly too short of a distance to be able to do. But if we did this twice as far, you can see. So I'm just going to manually make right angles just to keep them in line with the splitters. And since the distances are plenty far enough in between machines, it won't be an issue. But let me show you how to place this. So to get the second one, I find it easiest just to place down a temporary foundation, and then I can line it up with both the input and the other junction. And then for this is obviously not going to make the right angle that I want here. So for that, we're just going to come out 1, 2, 3, go up 2. And then from there, we can connect that and go ahead and get rid of the pipeline support. And then this can just be a straight pipe. If you're like me, this is where I would recolor these to be whatever the inputs are, because I like to color coordinate the pipes. Just saves me some headache in the future. And with the one without the junctions and splitters, it was pretty easy. I just lined it up in the same spot in the blueprint designer. I went ahead and placed the lifts and whatnot. Now when it comes to the secondary piece of the blueprints, actually this is the primary one. So when it comes to the other blueprint for the blenders, this one is a little bit trickier, only because of the pipes connecting. So for the belts, if we switch over to belts, since I have these exactly lined up with each other, I can kind of test things out like this. So if I lock it into place, it won't let me place it, but I can still lock it in place and make sure everything is angled the way I want it. Everything's on the right level, all that jazz. So I can tell these are just going to be one belt connection to do both of these inputs. With the pipes, however, this one I was able to bring out because, as we can see, if we grab that one, we've got a nice right angle. That's great. Now, unfortunately, with this one, because I want the same right angle, this one isn't a straight 90-degree pipe. And I can't add just 1 meter. It won't let me add such a small section of pipe to make it even with this, and then it'd be able to easily connect into the pipeline junction. Because I really do prefer this look over that, to me it's worth it to leave it like this. Now, the way you have to connect the pipe then is, instead of it being a straight shot like this, you need to go from the pipeline junction, then you're going to go back to, and this is basically where you're going to place the pipe. And then from here, you can make the right angle, because that's enough of a distance that it would be fine. And then you've got your straight connection, and then I would just delete this. So this is how I like to connect the two blueprints. However, if you don't really care about it being a perfect little S shape, then you could bring this out 1 meter and then just make that a one pipe connection, making it really simple, nice and easy. And honestly, there's probably a dozen different ways to do this, so play around with it and see which one you like. Now let me quickly show you the two blueprints I use to bring manufacturers and blenders together. So for the mergers, I have a 4 stack of splitters. Now obviously, going and just placing 4 is really easy. So do I need this blueprint? No, absolutely not. I just find it much easier when it is all one piece, as I can lock it in place, I can nudge it, I can get it exactly where I want, and then it's just one click. The other benefit is I can also just delete it in one click if it is off. So it's a really simple blueprint, but things like this where I know I'm going to need a whole bunch of them, I find it really useful to go ahead and just blueprint. Now with the blenders, I would absolutely blueprint this, especially if you're using all 4 of the inputs. This is going to make life a lot easier. Now for me, before each project, I'm going to color whatever pipes are the correct color so that I don't have to go back and recolor things. It'll just save you a lot of time. So them kind of clipping together isn't my favorite thing, but that is just the way that these things match up. So if I were to place down a pipeline junction to go into that pipe, that's obviously a straight pipe and where it's supposed to be. And then if we add the belt conveyor stackable poles, and then we add the belts, those are where they're supposed to go. So this looks normal and this looks fine. It's just the junction splitters, like splitters merge into each other, but I think we're all just kind of used to it, that it just looks fine and normal. It's just when they kind of merge together like this, the two different styles, it's not my favorite thing, but I kind of feel like that's kind of how the game is supposed to be, so I'm just going to roll with it. If you wanted to add a bigger gap or do all sorts of stuff, you could totally get around it. But to me, it's not too bad. And once the whole factory is filled with belts and pipes, you just kind of don't notice, in my opinion. But to do this easily, because if you've ever tried, these don't really stack easily on top of each other. It's even if you hold control, you can't get it to snap right on top. So what I did is I placed the first one, and then I just grab a temporary foundation. So I know that the difference in height is 2 meters. It sure doesn't look like it right here, but that's the difference in levels between the stackables. So what I want to do, instead of grabbing it on top of here, I want to place it on the foundation so that it's only 2 meters above. And then I'm going to place it and nudge it over into place. Once I have that, I can go ahead and add another 2 meters. I can grab a splitter, and now I can nudge this one over into place, place it, and then obviously the second splitter is really easy. Just snap that right on top, delete the 2 foundations, and there you go. So this will save you a lot of time and effort if that's how you want to belt and pipe everything up. So just to give you some quick examples, normally manufacturers in the early part when you first get them, you use them in pretty small quantities. So 6 would actually be a fairly big factory when you first get them. Later on, you'll get the pleasure of placing, dozens of them at a time and linking those together. But this is a pretty basic design that I think you can probably see how it could scale up. So we've got manufacturer 1, man 3, man 2. So for whatever reason, I labeled the middle one with the splitters as 3. I don't know why. I think honestly it's because the first couple times I needed manufacturers, I didn't actually need the splitters to be in the middle. And so if, say, I was gonna split, instead of a 3-way split, I only needed 2, I would place the manufacturer 1 and then split it to the manufacturer 2. Now this is where you really have some options. So the 2 ways I like to space these out is I usually either give them their own 4 foundation grid each, or I have them kind of overlap and there's basically just shy of 1 foundation in between the 2. Now I can grab my splitters for the vertical, and since I can see that everything right here is lined up on this half of the foundation, if I make sure my splitters are on the other half, all of this will just easily snap together with right angles. So we can just start with the bottom, and there we go. So if I'm only doing even numbers, like 2, 4, obviously 6, you're going to want to do it that way. 8, anything like that, I use this, where I just need the 2 sides and I don't need the one with the splitters. And that's how I'm going to build out the factory and load balance it. So same thing with the blenders. I just need the splitters and pipeline junctions if I'm going to be splitting it in 3s. But if it's an even number, then I'm just going to take 2 of these ones and use that splitter junction cross blueprint. So same thing, we'll keep them spaced out the same. Grab the 2 pipe 2 belt splitter stack. Probably could have came up with a better name, but same thing, everything is lined up right on the edge of this half foundation. So as long as I place this on the other side, everything should, minus these ones right here, be nice right angles. So I usually start at the bottom just to make things a little bit easier on myself. So those, nice and easy. Now, like I mentioned, this isn't going to be clean. So the easiest way to deal with these is just use a stackable pipeline support. And the middle of the machine is where it's supposed to go, but easiest way to make sure is to line it up and then nudge it over 2 meters. And so I'll do the same thing on this side. So we'll get it lined up with everything and then move it over to the right, 2 meters. And then from here, we can make the 2 connections and we've got our nice right angles. And obviously belts are super easy. Just connect the lift to the splitter. And there we go. There we have a 2 split, and that's a 3. If you were going to join up a 3rd one to make it a 6, you just use that same junction and then do this setup a 2nd time, so on and so forth. So those are my very basic manufacturer and blender blueprints. If you do decide to use them, they are on the Google Drive. One recommendation I would have is load them up, and you're most likely going to want to change the power unless you do something very similar to mine. So all of these are at a height of 4 foundations. Since I normally build towers, that's how tall each of the floors are, which isn't great for blenders in my opinion, because they just barely fit in there and you can't see the cool part on the top. So I really like to put the blenders outside. So when I do use blenders, I will load up the blueprint, change the recipe to clock speed. If I don't need all 4 inputs, I can just delete the one that I don't need. And same thing with this blueprint, swap out what I don't need. And for stuff like that, sometimes if you only need one of the pipes, then you could very easily readjust the height on those, or you could just not have the whole clipping situation and just leave the gap. which is usually what I would do. I just like this look. It doesn't really bother me that there's kind of an empty gap there. And if these aren't going in a tower, I will just delete these and create a different kind of power solution. When I'm building outside, I'll often use the frame pillars or even the small ones and just do something like this. And I'll have that included in the blueprint where I'll just have this stretching across. And by doing this, you can often get the spacing just right. So I can get it to go from there to there, which would be perfect. And then I could just slam the blenders all next to each other and I don't have to worry about the spacing because that's doing the exact spacing I want and it's built in. So I hope this helps or inspires you in some way to make your own blueprints. If you do decide to use them, I hope they serve you well. If you have any issues, questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to leave me a comment below. The next video will go over the blueprints I'm using to make my towers in my load balance playthrough. So look forward to that, and thanks for watching.